So we have some disappointing news when it comes to former Impact World Champion Eric Young, because he has revealed that he is now suffering with an injury. He has a torn ACL and could be out for between 6 to 9 months. Now, Impact Wrestling's Eric Young has torn his ACL and will miss between 6 to 9 months of action because of this injury. Talking to the Wrestling Perspective podcast, the former TNA World Champion and Impact World Champion revealed he sustained the injury during a match with Cowboy James Storm set to air this week on Impact Wrestling on Access TV. He said, quote, "At the last tapings, I tore my ACL. It's the first time I've ever been injured. I missed my first wrestling show this Friday that I was booked on in 24 years of doing it. So it's frustrating. I've never been injured. I've been hurt lots, but I've never been injured. I have to have surgery in like a week and a half, and it's going to be a long, long road. I'm aiming for 6 months. I've always been very durable. I've always healed very quickly, but my ACL is completely torn, which I didn't know. That happened during the match Monday with Storm. I finished it like nothing happened." Young initially didn't realise the extent of his injury, wrestling 2 more matches after the bout with Storm. He said, quote, "I finished a Hardcore War 8-man tag the following day. Then I wrestled Eddie Edwards on Tuesday in a singles match. It was like 20 minutes on one leg, and I would put that match against anything that airs anytime for any wrestling company anywhere in the world. And I did it on one leg. I'm very proud of it." So certainly it's a massive, massive blow. I mean, it goes without saying, that is a massive, massive blow for Impact Wrestling. I feel really, really bad for Eric Young as well, because this is a guy that, I mean, the frustration levels that he was having to sustain in WWE were incredible. They really were. And this was a guy, I mean, you talk about obviously the people that were misused in WWE and that big group of people that were released last year as part of the budget cuts associated with the pandemic. You think of the names like EC3, like Kurt Angle, Rusev, now Miro, of course, the Good Brothers, etc. And they were all names that people were, I don't want to say glad, because I don't think anyone should ever be glad that someone loses a job. But I think people like your Miros, like your Good Brothers, people almost slightly welcomed them because one, they knew that people wanted to get out of the company, but two, people realized that they could go on to other companies, do great things, have great successes despite the pandemic. Matt Cardona was another name that people were like, finally, this guy's going to get the respect that they deserved. And I felt that Eric Young in that group, I mean, arguably Eric Young had been treated worse than any of those people. And the reason I say that is because even though they were being treated badly, your Miros, your Matt Cardonas, your Good Brothers, etc., they were still being featured roughly on television, and they were just the subject of bad creative, and there was still a sense of optimism and a sense of hope that they were going to go to other companies and they were going to thrive. It was almost inevitable, that kind of stuff. Eric Young, on the other hand, he just hadn't even been featured at all, and so much so that people had forgotten about him. This wasn't in the level of a Miro. This wasn't in the level of an FTR when their contract expired, or when they were going to get released, or they got released in the end, didn't they? But this wasn't on that level because, frankly, I mean, he just hadn't been used at all. He had been forgotten about, apart from a cameo on Monday Night Raw where he didn't even get an entrance and he would just get destroyed. Eric Young just disappeared off television, not for any fault of his own. I mean, he'd maybe be on Main Event or something like that, but this was a guy that, I mean, he was barely an enhancement talent for WWE. And I felt so bad for him at the time because this was a guy that had so much success in Impact Wrestling. And even when he came over to WWE initially, when he was in NXT, he did have so much success as part of the Sanity faction, as the leader of the Sanity faction. They were in the first War Games match. They had so much popularity in NXT, and everyone felt that they could transition to the main roster, and obviously it never happened. They went to SmackDown, maybe got used once or twice, and then split up, and then Eric Young just disappeared. He just disappeared. He didn't even become another name on the roster. He just vanished. And if you listen to the interviews that he's had over the course of the last 12 months, and he's spoken about the frustration he had when he was in WWE, and going to Vince McMahon, having an open conversation with Vince McMahon and saying, look, Monday Night Raw is 3 hours long. It's 3 hours in length, and I mean, if you're watching this video, you've probably watched Monday Night Raw regularly, or at least used to, or maybe have tried to, and you realise that is such a long show. And not only is it a long show, but I mean, a lot of the time it's very, very boring. And on top of that, it's a show that's padded because they struggle to fill the time. It's padded with replays or adverts or just whatever, or resets, just because they're constantly trying to fill the time. And Eric Young had a conversation with Vince McMahon and said, look, Raw's 3 hours long. You can't find 5 minutes for me, and I'm not saying I'm this great professional wrestler, I'm the best wrestler in the world, I'm the next coming of Stone Cold Steve Austin, but you can't find 3 minutes for me, 5 minutes for me. I mean, Eric Young's proven he has a track record that he can do anything. He really can do anything. He can do comedy, he can do seriousness, he can be a part of the tag team, he can be a singles guy, he can be a leader of a faction, part of a faction. He really can do it all, and they couldn't find 5 minutes for him. And I think he got so disheartened by that, and he spoke about just completely falling out of love with pro wrestling. So much so that when he did get released, people kind of shrugged. And again, I felt so bad for him about that because he is excellent. And if you followed his career in Impact Wrestling, you would know he's excellent. And he really is, because he can do it all. So I was so thrilled that when he came back to Impact Wrestling, he didn't really come back to so much fanfare. I know he returned in the Slammiversary main event last year. He wasn't technically the mystery man because the mystery man was Rich Swann, and then he kind of added himself into it. But he came back to Impact Wrestling, and then within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he was already more relevant like that than he had been for 2 or 3 years. I mean, just so quickly. He did the attack on Rich Swann, they did the big injury angle, he was crazy, he had blood on his face, and Eric Young just went on this roll last year that he became not only the biggest heel in Impact Wrestling, but he was doing some of the best work in professional wrestling at the time. He really was. And I know people will say, well, that's not true. Go back and watch it. Because Eric Young came in, he didn't have a contract, he had an agreement, maybe a per appearance deal, I don't know, but he was figuring it out to see if he was really comfortable with going back to Impact Wrestling. He was so good that he changed the plans for Bound for Glory, he got himself a contract, and he got himself over once again with Impact Wrestling because the work he was doing as the world-class maniac, whatever you want to call him, was so fantastic that they made him the Impact World Champion. Originally it was going to be Eddie Edwards, I think, versus Ken Shamrock for the Impact World Championship of Bound for Glory. Those were the rumours. And the work was so great, the storyline and the angles were so great between Rich Swann and Eric Young that Impact Wrestling tore up that script and said, you know what, Eric Young versus Rich Swann has to be the main event. And by proxy of Eric Young, he didn't just get himself over, he got Rich Swann over to another level. He elevated Rich Swann just up to another level. And so much so that Rich Swann's now still currently the Impact World Champion. He's the unified Impact World Champion because he won the TNA World Heavyweight Championship too from Moose. And now he's going to be competing against Kenny Omega, Impact Rebellion, title versus title, AEW World Championship versus Impact World Championship. That happens obviously because of Rich Swann, because of the work he put in. But it's impossible to do that without Eric Young. That's how spectacular his work was last year. And obviously there was a concern coming out of that. Okay, Rich Swann then wins the World Championship. What does Eric Young do next? Well, forms a stable, Violent by Design. Joe Doring, Cody Deaner, then Rhino. And I felt that initially, and this, I mean, the videos are probably out there on the channel, that initially I wasn't sure in it, and I wasn't sure if it was the most positive follow-up to what he was doing. But in recent weeks, you've really started to see it come together. And I really have been enjoying the work, and I'm enjoying where that storyline has been headed, because obviously there are other factors I think that come into it. Well, there is, of course, as I mentioned, Rhino's now part of the faction. Does when they obviously attacked Heath Slater, or Heath, so that ruled him out of television for a while, and you would have assumed when he came back he would be feuding by Violent by Design, or does he join Rhino, all that kind of stuff. Everything I think they were doing was really strong, and I think it was kind of slightly falling under the radar in terms of what was going on with Impact recently, because there's been a lot of high profile stuff, especially with the AEW crossover. But if you're a regular watcher of the program, you would know that Eric Young has continued to do excellent work, and he was really building something that I think could have crescendoed nicely. And it's a shame, it's a massive shame. And look, for 6 months, 9 months, if it's close to 9, obviously it's a long time, it's a tough injury. I would hope it doesn't keep him off of television. I don't think it necessarily has to. I think given the fact that he's the leader of a faction, there is a possibility there that he can still cut promos. There's a possibility that he can still be at ringside, or he can still do vignettes, or he can still do whatever. He doesn't necessarily have to wrestle. And recently, I know this is going to seem a bit silly considering he said that he's just wrestled 3 matches at the last TV tapings, but he hasn't been wrestling as much because he's got the stable. He would still be obviously involved in the Violent by Design stuff, but he wouldn't be in every match. He would be in more the high profile stuff, but obviously that's just not going to happen now. Obviously that's just not going to happen now for 6 or 9 months. And I just hope, as I mentioned, I hope this doesn't mean that, okay, well, he's going to be off of television because he's got to be rehabbing. Considering his strength, his promos at the moment, I would hope he can continue to cut promos, given the fact that the way that Impact Wrestling tapes their television programming, which is obviously these bulk TV tapings once or twice a month, that would only mean, and I don't know ultimately where he's currently based. He might be based in Orlando in Florida. He might be based in Nashville. He could still be, in Canada. I don't know. If you know where Eric Young's based, you can let me know in the comment section below. If he's based in Nashville, the travel isn't that bad. Even if he's based in Orlando, it's doable. It's doable, isn't it? So in that case, I still think there's a possibility he can go to every or most TV tapings. I think he can still be involved with Violent by Design, because I would hate to see this faction, this stable, just be dropped because of Eric Young's injury. This is something that they've invested a lot of time in. They've gradually built up. They've gradually, brought new people in, whether it is Joe Doring, whether it is Cody Deaner, whether it is Rhino, and every single person has undergone a change. I think the Cody Deaner transformation that you can see there is for the better. I think Joe Doring being in, I wasn't sold on him initially. Obviously, he's a giant man. I wasn't familiar with his work in All Japan Pro Wrestling, but the more I see him, I think he's fantastic. He's a good old-fashioned heater, and he's excellent in the role that he's portraying right now, the muscle, the heavy of the group. I think he's excellent, and I think he really complements someone like Eric Young fantastically. And I would hate to see all of that end just because of an injury, even though it's obviously a very serious injury. So it's very disappointing on the part of Impact Wrestling. As I mentioned, they've got a couple of injuries right now, which is disappointing to major stars. Eric Young's a big name going down. Obviously, they've still got Heath on the sidelines as well. And that all obviously affects this angle, because I would assume Heath would have been involved. I don't know the timeline for Heath when he's scheduled to come back. It was a big delay on him getting surgery as well, because he had essentially 3 injuries at once. He had a hernia, and it was nasty. So it took him like 2 or 3 months to actually find a surgeon that was willing to do the surgery. I think he has since had the surgery, but I believe that was only at the start of the month, at the end of February maybe. So he would still, I would assume, be out for a while. And obviously Eric Young's going to be out now until, possibly you're looking at maybe the end of the year. It might even be next year at this point, which is so disappointing considering that we're in March, sort of April time. It's very disappointing on the part of Eric Young. Obviously injuries are a part of pro wrestling, but I think the timing is just super, super unfortunate. But hopefully they can find a way around this. Hopefully they can find a way of keeping Eric Young on television. And it said it would just be such a shame to see the faction be dropped, because I would wonder, okay, what does Joe Doring do next? What does Cody Deaner do next? They've just done the big split between him and Jake something and all that, and I would hate to see Cody Deaner or Joe Doring and even Rhino floundering and having nothing to do because Eric Young came down with an injury. So fingers crossed, obviously, first of all, fingers crossed the surgery when Eric Young gets it goes well, and hopefully he can return sooner rather than later. Hopefully it's more closer to the 6 months time period as opposed to the 9 months. Secondly, hopefully this doesn't remove him from television. He can still be an absolutely compelling character and obviously a mouthpiece for the faction. I think he can do an excellent job doing that, and hopefully he will. And I think Impact Wrestling would probably be looking at that saying, well, let's not rule everything out here. And I think that's the way that Impact Wrestling would look at it, because again, it's so much work for it all just to disappear, and that would be really disappointing. I think ultimately that would be the most disappointing thing, wouldn't it? Here being, you've put all of this time and he's been doing such fantastic work. You've even brought wrestlers in like Joe Doring. You've switched people from baby faces to heels like Cody Deaner, like Rhino. For it to all be dropped would be really disappointing, wouldn't it? So hopefully that isn't the case, but it's unfortunate. But we're still going to see Eric Young have matches on TV, because like he said, he had the match against James Storm, which is James Storm's 1000th match, I believe, or that's the way they're hyping it. And we're going to see him actually wrestling on television for the next few weeks. So again, that's going to be interesting to see how they address things, because did the matches that Eric Young had, did they factor into Rebellion? Are they going to have to kind of switch things around, change things around? Sometimes that's the problem when you take television far in advance as well. Obviously, there's a lot of things to address. Nevertheless, let's hope that Eric Young does have a speedy return and isn't off of Impact Wrestling television and can continue his Violent by Design stable. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Eric Young being out with a torn ACL injury, possibly being on the shelf for between 6 to 9 months? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.